time to think. The existence of evil. Does evil point to the existence of God, or is it an argument against his existence? Or perhaps, is it love that makes evil even possible? Evil cannot be a problem for the atheist. Why do I say that? Evil is real. What is evil and how did it come about? Why does it exist? What is the explanation from a materialistic atheistic viewpoint, and what is the explanation for evil from the Christian viewpoint? The existence of evil poses three important arguments against the existence of God. So what are these arguments, and what are the responses to these arguments? Welcome to my YouTube channel, Talk, and the fourth topic in the series, A Time to Think. I'm Tertius, a reconstructive plastic surgeon with a zeal for God, a zeal for truth, and why it is rational to believe in God. Why can evil not be a problem for the atheist? In a materialistic worldview, there is no objective right and wrong. Materialism implies no free will. Man is just a moist robot reacting to physical and chemical processes, to genes and to the environment. There is nothing transcendent. I quote new atheist Sam Harris, "Free will is an illusion so convincing that people simply refuse to believe that they don't have it." With no free choice, evil is not possible with a materialistic worldview, and therefore neither the consequences or the responsibility of one's actions. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. This is a quote from atheist Richard Dawkins. If materialism is true, the thoughts we have and the conclusions we reach are produced and controlled by forces that are irrelevant to purpose, truth, and validity. But man cannot live this way, live this worldview, and the atheist has to make leaps of faith into an upper level where God exists, as it is not tenable to remain on the lower level, the level where there is no God, and live as if there is no evil. See Francis Schaeffer's The Two-Story Universe on my YouTube video, The Absurdity of Life Without God, the link in the description below. Evil is a reality, and the materialist, the atheist, argues that the existence of evil poses three arguments against the existence of God. What are these arguments? It's the logical argument, the evidential argument, and the existential problem. We will address all three of these arguments and give responses to them. Firstly, then, the logical argument. The argument goes like this. An omnipotent, that is Almighty God, would be able to eliminate evil. B, an omniscient, that is all-knowing God, would know how to eliminate evil. And C, an omnibenevolent God, in other words, an all-loving God, would want to eliminate evil. However, evil exists. So, the God set is inconsistent. Either God is not omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, giving that evil exists, or evil wouldn't exist. Therefore, the God of the traditional theism doesn't exist. It is irrational to believe in an all-knowing, almighty, all-loving God. So what is the response to this, the counter-argument? And that is the free will defense. To love without being free to choose is a contradiction in terms. Wrong choices lead to personal as well as natural evil. Alvin Plantinga explains this in his The Free Will Defense and states that God's existence is not logically incompatible with evil. It is possible that God might have reasons for allowing evil. Therefore, if reasons are possible, then God's existence is not logically incompatible with the existence of evil. A world with moral good is better than a world without it, but only free agents can do moral good. Secondly, could God have created free moral agents who never do wrong? No, genuine freedom entails the possibility of going wrong. It is up to the free creatures whether or not they would go wrong. The free will defense is in fact so successful that philosophers no longer believe that the logical argument poses a serious argument against the existence of God. So the second argument, the evidential argument, this argument goes like this. In a court of law, it appeals to the preponderance of the evidence. In other words, evidence that will be concluded beyond reasonable doubt. It is argued that there is some evidence for God's existence, but weighed against all the evil in the world, the scale tips heavily against God's existence. The response here is, this argument is based on probability and inference, similar to an argument that goes from there is no good that we know of to there is no good, which is an assumption. So the argument goes from no apparent reason for all the evil in the world to no morally sufficient reason. It goes from an inexplicable and incomprehensible evil, in other words, from evil that we cannot understand to pointless evil for which there is no good reason. And why should we expect to see all God's possible reasons to have access to His knowledge? And we are morally free creatures who can do and indeed do wrong. The evidential argument makes God's existence less probable, but there is strong cumulative evidence for God's existence. Evidence like objective morality, the beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the reliability of the New Testament manuscripts, to name a few. Our lack of comprehensive knowledge of God's knowledge and intentions with the concept of free will makes the existence of God very likely and the counter-argument against the evidential argument. So thirdly, the existential problem. Evil exists, but atheists have no definition for evil, what evil is and why it exists, and see it either as undeserved or as unnecessary, purposeless suffering. But evil and suffering exist, and it is very personal. One's reaction to evil and suffering determines the meaning of evil and suffering. You can also see my video on God and suffering, of which the link is below. Evil either draw people closer to God or destroy their belief in God. It causes either despair or indifference or spiritual growth. What about natural evil? The free process defense to defend natural evil is similar to the free will defense for moral evil that we have just argued. A world in which free creatures can exercise genuine creativity, thereby bringing about truly novel effects, is better than a static one in which we could not exercise creativity at all. In biblical creation, God gave man dominion. We often exercise this badly, but we are given it to make a real difference in the world. A static world would not allow for that. Is God the reason for evil and suffering? Let's consider light and darkness, God and evil. Light is an entity, a thing, with distinct and independent existence, something with physical properties. Darkness is not an entity, has no physical properties or any other properties. It is just the absence of light. Light does not depend on darkness, but makes it possible that the concept of darkness exists. Light can exist without darkness. The concept of darkness, however, cannot exist without light. God is an entity, a subject with properties. Evil is not the absence of God, unlike darkness, which is the absence of light. But evil is a real entity with properties. That is, for instance, evil intentions. Thus different from darkness. Evil is something negative and in particular relational. God, an absolute and an entity, does not depend on evil, but evil cannot exist without good, without God. The existence of God makes evil possible, but God can exist without evil and does not cause it. The concept, the entity of evil, cannot exist without God, because the essence of evil is to choose against who God is, and God is the standard that the entity of evil is compared to decide that an act is evil. This is a further point in the argument for objective moral values because God exists. From the Christian perspective, what is evil and why suffering? The existence of God, of a mind who is love, created humans in his image to love him and to love his fellow man. Love demands free will. To love without being free, to choose, is a contradiction in terms, as I've said before. Wrong choices lead to personal and natural evil, and therefore suffering. God wills what is good because he is good. Moral actions conforms to God's nature, to who he is, and the more it confirms to his nature, the better it is. For clarity, we'll discuss evil and suffering separately, though one is the direct consequence of the other. So firstly, looking at evil. God is good and not the reason for evil and or suffering. The fall of man is, or if you would, original sin, choosing against the will of God every day, against what is good, against who he is. The reality of every person's life every day, selfish choices. The consequence is suffering. So we can distinguish between personal evil and natural evil. Personal evil, choosing self, people and things above God. Natural evil. The world was created perfectly, but it's now a broken reality. And I'll name a few examples. Tectonic plates that move and cause earthquakes and tsunamis is the result of convection currents generated by radioactive decay. Mutations in DNA and RNA is always an anomaly, a degenerative process that can have beneficial effects like adaptation and microevolution, but the cause of the emergence of viral and bacterial pathogens causing disease like the COVID-19 at the moment that we see everywhere. And it causes destruction. It causes other diseases like cancer also in children and many more negative effects from this decay of mutations. The second law of thermodynamics is a process of decay. The universe is decaying, running out of energy. And we read that the whole creation has been groaning together in pains. But there is a promise. God will renew and restore. Hope for broken relationships and for the broken world. Suffering is the consequence of evil. The fall of man is the reason. And we can look at personal suffering and collective suffering. Now, on personal suffering, I would like to distinguish between black suffering and white suffering. Black suffering is because of evil. God is not the reason for it. For example, broken relationships as a result of arrogance and pride, or because laws have been broken and one has to pay a fine or sit in jail. This is always accompanied by guilt feelings. Secondly, white suffering. This is from God for a reason, as in the story of Job, or personal suffering, hardships as a result of someone following Christ. But the fall of man is still the underlying cause. If there were no sin, no Satan, Job would not have suffered, and there would have been no pain to love and live for Christ. White suffering is always without guilt feelings, knowing it is a result of having done the right thing. So shared suffering of humanity is the consequence of personal as well as natural evil. Evil finds its meaning in how we react to it. In the Christian's life, more often than not, Christians become closer to God with personal growth as a result of suffering. God is a good God. He did not need evil in order for his goodness to be good. He did not need to create, nor did he need people. He's always been the eternal triune God in perfect love and harmony. He freely decided to create and to bless creation with the gift of freedom, the gift of love. Evil and suffering is the inevitable risk for the gift of free choice, of free will, the gift of love. And depending on our response to this responsibility and the consequence of evil and suffering can draw us closer to God and give more meaning to our lives. If you found what was argued here useful, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Share it with your friends and family and also on your social media platforms. This will be of huge help to spread the message of why it is rational to believe in God. The facts that parents, children, students, and people wondering about the reality of God should know and perhaps find helpful. Thank you until the next talk.